the no-low becomes a substitute or a kind of an option for when you can't have alcohol. But the message seems to be you will go back and drink alcohol. It's the same with the dry January or the dry month messaging around no-low, sort of this idea of for this month while you give up alcohol, here's a replacement or a product that you can use. But don't worry, once that sort of defined period is over, you can go back and resume alcohol consumption again.
I dreamt that you were twisted through seven.
Hello there and welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I am here today with a guest. I would like to welcome Emily Nicholls. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Veronica. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Emily is Dr. Emily Nicholls is a lecturer in sociology at the University of York. And somebody sent me some research that she did. And I was like, that is so interesting. I would love to talk to her about that. And it's research it's published in the Institute of Alcohol Studies, and it's into the no and low alcohol market in the UK. First of all, how did you get interested in this?
So I had a bit of a roundabout journey into studying sort of sobriety and no-lows. I actually started as a scholar doing gender research at Newcastle University, and I got interested in how women in particular kind of do gender and how we construct kind of feminine identities. And the hook, if you like, to get me into looking at how we do that was the girls' night out. So women going on nights out with female friends, and particularly the ways in which they used alcohol to craft these kind of, feminine or girly identities. And when I was studying this, it was a time in my life when I was also a bit of a party girl, drinking quite heavily. So perhaps I was drawn to the girls' night out because it kind of spoke to me as a young student as well. I actually stopped drinking for a couple of years as I grew older. And then my interest kind of shifted more towards sobriety. So I was interested particularly in how women who have been drinking for quite a while and might be known as quite heavy drinkers and known as the party girl, how do they kind of reconstruct those identities in early sobriety in particular I looked at. And then finally that led me towards no-lows. I just noticed what a huge growth area it is all around us. And it's kind of an extension of the earlier work I've done on sobriety to look more specifically at the ways in which no-lows are marketed, but also the ways in which they're used by consumers as well.
That's interesting because I'm a bit older than you, I think. I'm in my 50s, and my generation, Gen X in the 90s, I think we were the first generation where alcohol was really targeted at us. And the whole thing of like girls' night out was a big thing when I was younger. And it's all like to do with the targeting and, getting women to drink more. So it's interesting. I've been sober for by the time this comes out, almost 24 years. So I got sober in 2000. The alcohol-free market just wasn't a thing. I think there was was it O'Doul's? I think there was an alcohol-free beer, because I remember someone I knew drinking that because it was alcohol-free. But there wasn't really anything like there is now. It's massive, isn't it? How it's exploded.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my latest piece of research, talking to participants, that message came across loud and clear. They were talking about the dusty bottle of Beck's Blue that you would find on the back of the shelf in the pub, and you'd almost feel a bit self-conscious asking for this one alcohol-free beer compared to now when there's much, much greater availability. They still made quite a big distinction between drinking in pubs and bars and drinking at home. So they still felt that even though there's been positive change, in a lot of bars and pubs, there's still not a huge amount of options. It obviously might be very different if you live in London compared to if you live in like a rural village somewhere else in the UK. But really, they felt that the real opportunities for drinking and trying new no-lows were for home consumption. So they talked a lot about buying from specialist websites and, getting really invested in trying new products. Whereas when they went to bars and pubs, it was better, but still nowhere near as good as they felt that it could be, I think.
The difference between England and America is, I'm in the States, is bartending is you can make a lot of money bartending because of the tips. And there is a kind of art to it. People like to have asking for a cocktail is much more common in pretty much most bars in anywhere in America, whereas it isn't in England. I mean, it's like vodka and Coke, Bacardi, it's just not.
Mm-hmm.
So I can go out and say, if I go to a restaurant, I'll say, can the bartender make me a really nice alcohol-free mocktail? And they'll come back with something really interesting. But we don't quite have that yet in England. It's still kind of sugary, sweet, apple ties, isn't it? It's just like that kind of stuff. So there's still a lot of catching up to do there.
Yeah, I think definitely. And that was a huge thing they talked about, was these sugary replacement drinks not feeling like a treat or a grown-up drink. They were like, I don't want like a fizzy apple juice or a J2O as we have in the UK.
Yeah.
So beer really was the main NOLO that participants talked about. And that was kind of the product that they drank the most frequently, the product that they thought most closely resembled alcohol. They definitely had a few issues with wine, definitely not tasting, being much harder to replicate no and low wine, for example, but certainly beer seemed to be predominantly the kind of NOLO of choice in the UK sample, I think.
Why is that, do you think?
I wonder if it's tied into kind of wider cultural norms about beer drinking in the UK. I mean, like you said, in the States, maybe cocktail drinking being more normalised. I think it's not to the same degree here. It's still potentially quite gendered. So a lot of the men that I spoke to in the study, I can't really imagine that they would have gone out and ordered a cocktail, even if they were still drinking. Whereas beer, I think, is much more widely consumed across demographics here. And as I say, I think it's just the easiest one to replicate. Like the quality of NOLO beer and the choice and availability of NOLO beer is much greater. They did talk about NOLO spirits, but the price point of that really put them off. So NOLO spirits are really, pretty much comparable in price to alcohol. If you want a big bottle of alcohol-free gin, for example. And I think participants felt they weren't really getting their money's worth if they were buying a product without alcohol, but they're paying the same as they were paying for alcohol. So that kind of left beer as the product that kind of like hit the spot or filled the gap the best, perhaps.
Interesting. So you start with, in your research, talking about that the no and low market is one of the fastest growing drink trends in the UK. And it also concedes with a decrease in drinking rates amongst young people. So first of all, why do you think Gen Z are drinking less?
Oh gosh,
because they watched us drink too much and thought that doesn't look attractive.
I mean, I think that might be part of it. Is kind of, something that is looking at what the previous generation is doing and not necessarily thinking of drinking as something cool or rebellious. But I think it's a question that has multiple factors, and a lot of academics had a lot of conversations about it. I think there's something to be said about, it's not wholly positive, that actually the younger generation are growing up in a time of kind of increasing precarity and uncertainty. They feel that they can't like let loose or let their hair down in the same way that, our generation might have been able to. There's research showing young people feel they have to kind of be always on, and even their leisure time needs to be doing some kind of CV enhancing, productive volunteering activity. And amongst the younger NOLO consumers I spoke to, they literally said, I don't have time for a hangover. I don't have time to go out and drink and have the knock-on consequences of not being productive the next day. So it just didn't fit in. And I think kind of also a wider reconfiguration of alcohol from this product, like we say, that's kind of cool or rebellious, to something that is just seen as risky, with risks in terms of in relation to mental and physical health. Those two themes came through quite strongly with the participants that I talked to, particularly some of the younger ones.
There's something interesting there about, I was just listening to, there's a new book coming out about, what's it called? I think it's called Bad Therapy. And it's about all of the mental health interventions that we've with good intentions are actually making our kids worse, and that we have a real mental health problem amongst young people. I've done quite a few interviews on this podcast about parenting as prevention of later addiction. And one of the people I interviewed talked about how, our kids have no freedom. Like they're just like everything like, and it's almost like they're so scared. And so there's something about their relationship to risk there, I wonder.
Yeah, massively. And we know, because the number one question that people ask of me when I say about youth drinking declining is, what are they doing instead then? What other risky things are they doing? And the answer is they're not. So we know that other risky behaviours, like more risky sexual practices, for example, smoking, are also on the decline. So there's this kind of I think you're right. Risk aversion, this idea of more intensive parenting, perhaps as well, that doesn't give young people the freedom.
Yeah.
Young people are staying at home longer because, for various financial reasons. So I think you're right. That sense of like freedom and that sense of having space to mess up or be hungover or be a state has been kind of lost for young people. And I think that's had a massive impact on the decline on, youth drinking rates.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that they were catching a buzz somewhere else. I mean, we know vaping is huge. I mean, that's not 40-year-olds starting to vape, that's teenagers. So they are doing something. It's fascinating to me. I'm a parent as well. So risk is a part of life. I mean, as a parent, you're like, oh, safe risk. But it is also part of life. So that's going to be interesting. You're a sociologist, right? That's going to be fascinating with development and that kind of stuff. So talk to me about, because you pointed some really interesting stuff about how it's being marketed.
Yes, definitely. And again, it's a bit of academics starting to have conversations about this. It's a bit of an emerging area. But I think one of the key things to observe in marketing, and this also does spill through into consumption, is whether we're seeing products being marketed as something to drink instead of alcohol or in addition to alcohol. And obviously the implications there can be quite significant in terms of like the consequences for public health, even, in terms of how these products are used. And what we're seeing certainly in some of the marketing that I looked at is what we call that addition model. So the idea that you would still drink your alcohol as you would do normally, but the no-low products become something to be consumed on top of your usual alcohol consumption. So, in different contexts, like the workplace or the gym or at different times of the day. I mean, some of the examples were quite shocking, and I shared them with my interview participants, and they were sort of like, well, I would never drink no-lows in that way. But the marketing, obviously, because a lot of no-lows are produced by alcohol and by the alcohol industry, the message is keep drinking our regular strength products, in the usual settings that you do, but actually expand your consumption now to include no-lows, at lunchtime or on a Tuesday or at the gym, for example. So some quite problematic marketing messages going on there, I think.
So you're kind of implying in your research there that it's like, so first of all, there's the whole thing where there's been, I've seen this in the time that in the last 35 years, how alcohol inserts itself in places it doesn't belong. I can see that from, when I was a teenager, it's just inserted in places. Alcohol and sport, they're not two things that go together, but we have made them. But alcohol and gyms. So you're kind of saying you're saying your research found that it's almost like in gyms, and it's kind of like, oh, I'll have a alcohol-free and gin and tonic, and I might as well have a real gin and tonic. It's like, is that kind of what you found? Like, it's like maybe there's a blurring there.
Yeah, I think, or a normalization. This idea that like you might have your no-low gin at the gym and then somehow get home and put your feet up and have the gin. So I think the messages are quite careful in that they're obviously not saying, you could have a beer behind. One of them was literally behind the wheel of a car. So they're not saying, you could also have the beer here, but they are like normalizing that idea of drinking something that smells like alcohol, looks like alcohol, tastes like alcohol, and then saying we still need to carve out those other spaces, the bar or the pub or the dinner out with your friends where you will drink alcohol. The no-low becomes a substitute or a kind of an option for when you can't have alcohol, but the message seems to be you will go back and drink alcohol. It's the same with, the dry January or the dry month messaging around no-lows, sort of this idea of for this month while you give up alcohol, here's a replacement or a product that you can use. But don't worry, once that sort of defined period is over, you can go back and resume alcohol consumption again.
What did your participants say? Like, you spoke to people who drank alcohol?
So drinkers and non-drinkers, about 50-50.
So what did the drinkers say?
So the drinkers talked a lot about what I've called kind of hybrid drinking. So, drinking no-lows and drinking alcohol, and using no-lows as a tool to drink more moderately, which I found really interesting. So they did not buy into these addition messages, this idea that their alcohol consumption would stay the same, but they'd be drinking NOLOs at work or on a play date with their friends' kids, for example. So they talked more about swapping out alcohol and drinking NOLOs instead, particularly during the week or at home. So it might be, I'll have a NOLO on a Tuesday evening at home, but I'll drink when I go out on the weekend, or I'll, have a NOLO in the home, but feel free that I can drink when I go out with my friends. So this kind of hybrid model of moderation was very much something that they talked about, and they valued the kind of choice and the flexibility that they felt NOLOs gave them.
So for the alcohol companies, they keep them. There's just something very interesting culturally about drinking at home and drinking outside of the home, but the alcohol companies keep them in the hook kind of thing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of keeping them warm, right? The other great example, of course, of this is during pregnancy. So the idea that the alcohol industry is literally, again, sort of keeping someone warm because they're switching to drinking a NOLO product for 9 months, and then they get back and start drinking, alcoholic beer again. And the other big area of concern around that, of course, is kind of young people or underage drinkers, using NOLOs as a kind of, you mentioned vaping. I think there's interesting parallels there, a kind of gateway product. So getting used to the taste of NOLOs, maybe parents saying, oh, you can have a NOLO drink when you're a bit younger in the home. But again, does that just kind of normalize this idea that we're drinking alcohol or something that's alcohol adjacent? And then it kind of, primes people then to have loyalty to particular brands or to start drinking alcohol, maybe, at a younger age than they might. So it's quite a complicated picture, I think, the NOLO stuff. On the one hand, maybe it's great if people are reducing their consumption, if people have more options. It's great for non-drinkers to have options. But I think there's quite a lot of insidious stuff going on here in terms of marketing and kind of how these products are positioned.
Yeah, there always has been. The alcohol companies, and they're self-regulated in the UK,
course,
which I've never understood. When you say NOLOs, so for me, because I'm sober, low alcohol is still alcohol. What is classed as low alcohol?
So it definitely varies in different kind of countries and jurisdictions. So generally within the UK, the kind of benchmark line seems to be below 1.2% ABV. So
okay.
I think, I almost can't remember now. There are slight nuances and variations within that. So if a product's 0.05, for example, it can have a slightly different label. But the kind of blanket category of no and low tends to be below 1.2.
Yeah, and then for someone like me who's sober, like it has to be 0. It can't even just be a tiny bit. So what were you finding when you spoke to the people who were like me, don't drink alcohol? Were they people who don't drink alcohol? Were they people who were sober, who'd had a problem in the past and who were now sober?
So none of my participants were never drinkers. None of them had never drunk alcohol.
Right.
They were all former drinkers. As to whether they'd have defined if they had a problem, that gets us into a whole foreign territory. I think for a lot of them, they wouldn't have defined as in recovery, for example, but they might have talked about alcohol was having negative impacts. They felt it was affecting their mental health. So they might have positioned themselves more as this term grey area drinkers, where it's kind of having an impact and it's something felt to be negative, but they didn't define themselves as problem drinkers or alcoholics or in recovery. So there were, and the same in my earlier work with recently sober women, there were lots of tensions around terminology and, whether we define as a problem drinker or in recovery. And there's some real question marks in the first place over the role of NOLOs for those who define as being in recovery. Because like you say, if we're looking at 1.2% products here that really resemble alcohol, the lines get a little bit blurred, I think, around what people feel comfortable with or what they feel is okay for them to do.
What I'm finding, which is really irritating to me, is I really, really have to check the packaging now. Quite often I'll see something and I think it's an alcohol-free product, and then I look and I see that it isn't. That there's a lot of that going on, I'm noticing, and it's very irritating for someone like me. And also, I just feel it's just another way they're trying to get young people and children. It was Alcopops. That was the thing that came out in the 90s. So there's a lot of that going on, don't you think? There's just a lot of blurring.
Yeah, a huge amount of blurring, and obviously blurring as well in how similar these products even look, shared
Yeah.
branding. So there's also blurring with marketing where, if, for example, Nolos aren't subject to as much regulation on their marketing, you can see Nolos being promoted, but basically you're still just promoting an alcohol brand, right? Because the
Mm.
Nolo looks the same as the alcohol. So some commentators have called it stealth marketing or alibi marketing. It's like, oh, you see this bottle of a 0% product, or like you say, maybe that it's not even very clear what percentage it is, and you're actually just going to think of the parent brand. You're going to think of the alcohol version of the brand. So yes, lots and lots of blurring going on there, I think.
Yeah, I about 3 years ago, I've tried different alcohol-free brands. I've never tried alcohol-free beer. I never drank beer for the taste. I've got no interest. I've tried alcohol-free wine, and I don't like it. My brain still associates it with getting a buzz, and it doesn't feel right. I've tried some alcohol-free cocktails, and I'm like, if I'm out, I'll have one, but I can't even imagine like coming home on a Tuesday mixing myself an alcohol-free cocktail. That just would seem really weird. And I think that that's kind of how I mean that's what marketing does. They want us to buy our products, and they want us to associate it with so many things, right? It's like nobody needs a no-low on a Tuesday. Right? I mean, who needs have
No,
some water, drink more water.
I know, but it's working. My participants talked about a treat and this idea and ritual, the idea of
Yeah.
coming home from work and getting your favorite glass out and crafting yourself a drink that looked like alcohol. They even talked about the psychological effects, describing Nolos as hitting the spot. So again, they do give you this feeling of relaxation and give you some of those positive associations of alcohol, but without the negative. So I think the marketing is working in that sense.
You make some recommendations. What do you feel policy wise in the UK we should be doing about this market? Because I mean, I don't know. I think we still have enough trouble regulating the alcohol market, which definitely needs regulating. Let alone this. But what are your policy recommendations?
So there have been a few changes in I think hopefully in the right direction since I wrote the report actually. So one of the things I think
wow.
that I talk about is around this point around marketing and regulation, and the fact that we cannot allow Nolos to kind of slip through the cracks of regulation and be promoted in ways that young people are going to see them, or in ways that, like we say, you're just going to associate them with the parent brand. So stricter and tighter guidelines around marketing. And I think that's something that the UK has recently had a consultation on. So hopefully we'll see some changes here. You mentioned the point about labelling as well, not being very clear, the percentage of drinks, having clearer, I think, definitions of what NOLO actually is and what is defined as no or low or alcohol-free or de-alkalized, for example. All these terms are used in the UK and they all refer to different percentages. So having some kind of clarity on that. And further research, I think, as well. So the UK government in 2019 announced that they were, going to nudge the public towards drinking Nolos and kind of held them up as this really great example of something that was going to improve public health. But actually, because we know still so little about how people use them, I think we need to be really cautious about seeing this as a universally positive development. And actually, we need to still understand much more about how people are using them and about whether they actually are reducing alcohol consumption or whether they're having these other actually more negative effects and consequences.
Well, thank you. That was really fascinating. And what were your personal takeaways, if I can ask, from doing the research?
I think I was quite shocked by some of the marketing and how blatant it was. The language of literally any time of the day, or the idea that you could literally drink something behind the wheel of a car. It was kind of designed to be quite shocking and provocative, I think, but it certainly was to see it. And then balanced with that point about hybridity that I made, about how drinkers were saying, no, we really value this choice and this flexibility, and we like being able to mix it up between Nolos and alcohol. So I think my takeaway was, probably unhelpfully, is that it's just, again, this blurred area where we cannot universally say, oh, it's so positive that we have this new market of Nolos, or it's so damaging and dangerous. Like, there has to be nuance there, and we have to recognise the potential for individual level health benefits, for example, versus the wider damaging narratives that are going on around perpetuating and normalizing alcohol consumption and around, this stealth marketing, for example. So I think that was my key takeaway. Was after doing the research, I still didn't know. I probably knew even less how I felt about no-lows. It kind of raised as many questions as it did answers, I think.
Yeah, I think I saw it as a fairly positive thing, like that people wanted to drink non-alcohol products, and also that somebody like me would be catered for, right?
Yes.
Like
yeah.
I've spent long time not being catered for, like not being thought about what a non-drinker would like to drink at a meal or at a special occasion or on a night out, apart from sugary soda. So part of me has thought it's quite a good thing, but reading your research has coincided with my thoughts about like just noticing, like looking and thinking, oh, does that have alcohol or not? Does that not? Like what my son picked up something once and said, Mum, can I get the lemonade? And I kind of went, oh, hold on a minute. I'm like, no, that has alcohol in it. Like, so I think we're there in the blurring. We're noticing the blurring now, and we need much clearer distinctions for everybody to just know. And I know the alcohol companies probably don't want that. And I think that's something that we've got to, in America, it's completely different. I don't even know where to get started on this. But I think the blurring is becoming a problem. I think the problem is the blurring is what I kind of took from your research.
Yeah. And I think just to add, there's a new level of blurring coming more recently, I think, with the, like functional no-lows. Have you heard of functional no-lows? So
no, what are functional no-lows?
So this is a whole new level of blurring. So they are no and low alcohol products, but they actually contain, like synthetic chemicals, for example, that enhance the feelings.
Yes.
So you do.
Yes.
So you're probably just not.
Yeah.
That's probably a bit of a like dry term to use, but this idea that now you might literally get a buzz or something that mirrors the feeling of, they're usually marketed around this one's for relaxation, this one's for like sociability. So again, to me, like where is the line with that? Now they're mimicking alcohol in even more ways because they're designed to mimic some of those kind of embodied effects of drinking. So again, it's just getting messier, and that's another area that I think we will see growth in over the next few years.
Yeah, I have noticed that where it's like it's not ethanol, but it's some, I don't know if it's CBD or what it is. It's something, to get a buzz or to relax or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of, I also kind of really want some clarity between no and low because I'm very much in the no, not the low. Low, it doesn't matter. It still can be triggering for someone who's recovering from an alcohol problem. So yeah, the blurring is, I think, the problem. And there's also now all this other stuff going on. Ultimately, they just want to keep us spending our money. That's what it's about marketing, which is kind of a whole fascinating. I've gone on my Instagram account. I go after people who market alcohol in which I feel is in a disingenuous way. So Cameron Diaz, the actress, has a line, an alcohol. It's alcohol. It's wine. It's called. I can't remember what it's called now. Anyway, organic. No pesticides. No low sugar. And I'm like, it's the marketing of alcohol as a health product.
Yeah.
But it's like none of those things matter because it has ethanol in it. There was one I saw at Christmas which was called Active Wine. It was a picture of someone being active on it. And I'm like, that's completely like, that is like you're implying that this is good for you. It will make you exercise or something.
So and we see that, of course, with no-lows again. This kind of idea of like, I've finished, I'm a runner and I've finished 10-mile runs, and you cross the finish line and you get given an alcohol-free beer that's isotonic, and it's a kind of as if that's the sort of thing you'd want to drink after you've just kind of struggled your way through a 10-mile race. And I think as well, it made me think a bit of like that kind of alcohol being marketed as like a feminist product as well, or mummy wine culture. Like there's all these different strategies that are used to hook consumers. So if the health wine's not going to hook you, then maybe the narrative of mummy deserves a glass of wine at the end of the day is going to hook you. So there's always a way, and I think particularly for women who are still a newer consumer market for alcohol than men, it's even more interesting to see where these particularly quite gendered patterns of marketing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd love to read more research on that. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. And please, if you have any more research relevant to this, let me know, because I'd love to talk to you further, because I think there's a lot that needs to be said about the marketing, really, and and the blurring and all that kind of stuff.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to chat.
Yeah. Are you on social media or anywhere that you want people to follow you, or?
I'm on X. If anyone's on X anymore, so it's at Dr Emily Nicholls. Or Google me, University of York, and you can also find my email address and my staff page. So if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm always happy to talk no-lows and sobriety and drinking.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.